Hey guys, Adam here with AmericanTrucks.com, and today we're taking a closer look at and of course installing the AFE Stage 2 XP Magnum FORCE cold air intake with the Pro Dry S filter, available for the 17 and newer 3.5 EcoBoost F150, excluding Raptor models. Now you should be checking this out if you're looking for a reusable dry filter with a huge upgrade in the cold air intake department to get a better breathing engine, horsepower and torque bump, as well as throttle response and acceleration, not to mention a more aggressive turbo sound. Now, as you know, these twin turbo 3.5 EcoBoosts here can reap a lot of benefits from a cold air intake, and this particular one from AFE has two independent dry filters, one dedicated to each turbo. Now these guys here are a huge upgrade over your factory paper element, and we'll take a closer look at that on the table later when we get our factory intake off of the truck. Know that each of these filters are 7 inches tall, conical, triple layered synthetic media filters here, do not require oiling, so it's a lot easier when it comes time for routine maintenance. They can just be power washed with some pressurized air and then thrown right back on. Now this intake here from AFE boasts a 68% increase in airflow. You're getting a lot more volume of airflow coming in, but it's worth mentioning this does not require a tune. Right out of the box, you can throw this guy right on under the hood and get going, no tune required, which is big for guys looking to save money up front. Now just know, if you did want to pair it with the tune, EcoBoosts always pick up a ton of power when it comes to adding a cold air intake in tune, upwards of around 100 torque in some cases, depending on the tune you pick up. So if you're looking to maximize power, that's a great way to go, but not required here. This is also going to boast 3.5-inch billet aluminum tubing with a black powder coated textured finish. Looks really good under the hood. Blends in a little bit with the black engine bay, but still pretty unique when it comes time for a car show if you're looking to show off under the hood. And it's got a billet aluminum AFE plate right there on the front, which I do think looks pretty nice. Now this is not a completely enclosed heat shield. Of course, anytime you get a closed airbox like that over the filters, it's gonna do a better job keeping out engine bay heat, but this guy does use weather stripping to seal in underneath the hood, which is definitely gonna go a long way for keeping cold air in and hot air out. Now this kit comes in right around 600 bucks. It is a more premium cold air intake kit in the category. AFE is known for that, and as you can see, we're working with some really high quality materials and some long lasting filters. So keep that in mind when you're shopping around. If you're looking to cut costs, there are other options out there. Now for the install, 1 out of 3 wrenches on our difficulty meter. You can tackle this guy in about 30 minutes to an hour from start to finish. It's a super simple install, no drilling or cutting or any of that nonsense. It's very, very simple for very simple hand tools, and I'll show you how it's done. Let's get to it. Tools used in this install include an impact gun and/or a ratchet, extension, 7 and 8 millimeter deep sockets, or you can just use a flathead screwdriver and a Phillips head screwdriver. All right, first step here is to loosen up the clamps holding on the factory tubing. Now the first one I want to tackle here is the bottom one, go into your bottom turbo there. This guy is really hard to see. The head for this clamp is all the way on the bottom inside. So I'm going to use an extension and my 7 millimeter deep socket to loosen that guy up. Which again, you're not going to be able to see, but once it's loose, you can see that guy start to come off. Now we can do the other two. All right, so the other one's up by your filter. Just going to loosen that up. And then finally the other one right next to your coolant reservoir. All right, now before we pop the whole thing off, go to the back here, and you're going to pinch and disconnect the temperature sensor harness just to make sure that's unclipped. All right, so next up we're going to snap off our lid for our filter, and we can disconnect the tubing and lift this up all in one piece, and then grab your filter. All right, so we got our factory intake off of our 17 EcoBoost behind me, and it's on the table next to our AFE cold air intake, and I want to take you through some similarities and differences between our two kits, and I want to start up front with our filter. Now your factory filter coming out of that air box is a flat paper element dry filter, one that's very common for manufacturers such as Ford, Chevy, and Dodge. And they do a pretty decent job pulling in air and also a pretty decent job filtering out particles you don't want getting into their engine bay. And you can see that this guy is looking a little worse for wear. It's actually due for a good cleaning or replacing. Now when it comes to taking a look at that compared to our twin filters here from AFE, there's a huge difference in not only air intake, but also filtration. Now this guy is a dry filter, which means it's not oiled, requires less maintenance than an oiled filter, which is definitely a bonus for guys not looking for that headache come routine maintenance. This is a 7-inch conical filter, as you can see, made of 3 layers of synthetic filter media. Now it's a little bit different than the flat paper element here, which is gonna help bring in a lot more airflow. Now AFE boasts a 68% increase in airflow compared to your factory intake and filter combo, which is gonna make a huge difference to throttle response, acceleration, and power. Now because this is a no tune required intake, We did not strap it down to the dyno today to give you some numbers, but do know that with AFE's 68% increase in airflow, you can definitely feel a bit of a power change here in a good way. Now there are 2 filters as compared to your 1 to help with your sequential twin turbos. This guy here is gonna help bring in a lot more air. It's also gonna filter out media that you don't want getting in. So it's really a best of both worlds situation. Less maintenance going to be required here than an oiled filter, while also bringing in a good amount of air. Now your intake tubes here are made of a 3.5-inch aluminum tubing, powder coated with a textured black finish, which not only looks good under the hood, but it's going to help with heat dissipation as well. You're getting a billet aluminum top for your air box, which is going to reuse the bottom portion of your factory air box, which is why we didn't uninstall that. This specific top portion here has 2 cutouts to adapt from a single filter to a dual filter, and it's got weather stripping here to seal in all of the cold air under the hood and block out some engine bay heat from the underside of your hood. New silicone couplers and clamps included in the kit for a leak-free finish, and really that's going to do it for this kit. Now what I want to do is transfer over a couple of factory components, and then we'll get to the install. All right, next up what we're going to do is disconnect our temperature sensor. Now that's on the side of our tubing here. All you're going to do is twist counterclockwise and just wiggle it until it pops right back off. Just like that, set it aside. All right, now when you transfer over the temperature sensor to your new intake housing, you'll see the fitting there is welded on. Make sure your O-ring is still intact. Slide this guy into place. You want to make sure that the tab there is facing the tab on the welded fitting. Rotate clockwise to tighten it in place, just like that. Next up, we're going to install our coupler here on that air temperature sensor side of our tubing. You're going to have a slightly larger inlet and a small outlet. Install the larger inlet onto the tubing there. Grab one of your clamps, slide it into position on the tubing side and your 8mm socket or your flathead, and tighten it down. Just like that. What I like to do is just take another one of the clamps. This one's gonna be a lot smaller. I'm just gonna set it in place on the coupler and just get it snug enough that it holds itself in place. Same thing on the other tubing. Grab the other coupler here, fit the appropriate side onto your tubing. Only one of the sides is gonna fit snug. Once you have that on there, rotate your clamp into position. Might have to loosen it up a bit to get it in the correct spot, and then tighten it down. Perfect. All right, I'm just gonna slide this guy in place as well. Make it a little bit more accessible inside the vehicle there. Perfect. While we're on the table, let's make life a little bit easier here for us. I'm gonna take this weather stripping here and apply it to the top portion of our airbox. I'm gonna go just from edge to edge where it'll seal up under the hood. All right, first step under the hood is to grab the airbox. We're gonna hook it onto the right side there and then snap the 2 clips shut to keep it in place. All right, next we're gonna put our filters in place. These guys will slide right into these open spots. I'm gonna pull this clamp out. There's little knobs on the end of the filter, so it should keep itself in place. You wanna make sure that the chrome strip there is facing downward. And I'm just gonna lay those clamps over top there for the time being. All right, next up we're gonna do our small tubing. The smaller one with the AFE plate, I'm gonna hook onto the bottom factory tube, and it's gonna go to our outermost or our frontmost filter here. All right, slide that guy in place. With that on, you wanna tighten down the clamp on the filter, making sure this is secure, as well as the clamp on the tubing down there by your turbo. I'm gonna loosen up this clamp a little bit just because it's at a weird angle. All right, now we can tighten it back down. Now before we move on to the other tubing, you'll notice there's a little hose fitting here. It's actually gonna connect both tubings together through the middle. and it's going to go on with this little hose included in the kit. Grab one of the hose clamps and set it over the end, and this I'm actually just going to use a simple Phillips head to tighten down. All right. And before we put the other end on, just make sure the other hose clamp is on there just to make it easier. All right, and now we can move on to our other tubing. I'm going to slide this onto the factory tubing in front of the coolant reservoir. All right, and when you're inserting that into the filter, you want to make sure it's going into the hose that we just installed first, and then guide it onto your filter, which can be a little bit of a tight squeeze. All right, and then we can finally do the hose clamp in the middle. All right, last but not least, grab your temperature sensor harness and plug it in. That'll wrap up my review and install for the AFE Magnum FORCE Stage 2 XP cold air intake in black with the Pro Dry S filter, and you can get yours for your 17 or newer 3.5 EcoBoost F150, excluding Raptor models, right here at AmericanTrucks.com.